Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're setting the stage for a deep dive into one of music's most successful and, honestly, most paradoxical acts of all time.
I want to start off by throwing a question your way. What does the band Chicago actually sound like? Take a second to think about it. The really fascinating thing here is that, depending on your generation, you might give a completely opposite answer from the person sitting right next to you.
Okay, let's dive into this wild juxtaposition. Because on the one hand, you've got their early identity, right? This gritty, politically charged, horn-driven jazz rock fusion band. But on the flip side, they are the slick, synthesizer-heavy, adult contemporary power ballad kings of the 1980s. I mean, they literally sound like two entirely different bands.
Yet both of these identities belong to the exact same group. And get this, they have sold a staggering 100 million records worldwide. 100 million! I emphasize that massive number because mastering this dual identity, completely adapting to entirely different musical landscapes over decades, well, that's exactly how they pulled off such monumental global success.
Section 1. The Jazz Rock Revolution.
So, let's rewind all the way back to 1967. You've got this group of incredibly talented DePaul University music students, and they set out to completely upend rock music. Now, here's a fun piece of trivia. Their manager, James Gorcio, initially named them the Chicago Transit Authority after the city's actual bus line that he used to ride to school. But, as you can probably guess, the real Chicago Transit Authority threatened a massive lawsuit over the name, which forced the band to shorten it simply to Chicago.
There's this great quote from trumpet player Lee Loughnane that perfectly captures their early mission. He said, "Our goal was to make horns the lead voice again in rock music." And as the Library of Congress texts point out, they absolutely didn't want brass just playing softly in the background. No way. They integrated these incredibly complex, Memphis-style brass arrangements to punch right through the gritty rock. They put the horns front and center.
That wild approach earned their unique sound a pretty legendary nickname, Jimi Hendrix with horns. And honestly, that brilliantly captures the raw talent of their founding guitarist, Terry Kath. The guy was an absolute force of nature. Actually, fun fact, Jimi Hendrix himself watched them play and was a massive admirer of Kath's scorching guitar work on their 1969 debut.
Speaking of that 1969 debut, it was a massive double LP that basically threw every convention right out the window. It had everything: psychedelic rock, extended jazz fusion jams, and then something incredibly unique: raw audio recordings of the 1968 Democratic National Convention protests. The band neutrally included the actual audio of the demonstrators and police, almost like an audio documentary. It really cemented their early identity as a politically charged band that was deeply intertwined with the times.
Section 2. The Pivot to Pop. Let's move on and see how this builds.
So how does a gritty, experimental jam band slowly morph into a massive commercial pop juggernaut? Well, the shift certainly didn't happen overnight. It really started to gain commercial traction in 1976, with bassist Peter Cetera's soft-focus ballad If You Leave Me Now, which actually became their first ever #1 hit. But the really pivotal and frankly heartbreaking turning point happened in 1978 with the tragic, accidental death of Terry Kath, who was, in so many ways, the rock and roll soul of the band. After a period of really struggling to find their footing without him, the arrival of producer David Foster in 1982 kicked an entirely new direction into high gear.
This whole era really exposed some shifting internal band dynamics. You have the gritty early leadership of Kath and keyboardist Robert Lamb, who were totally focused on rock and jazz, and then that contrasts sharply with the incredibly polished, chart-chasing 1980s direction driven by Peter Cetera and producer David Foster. It was this massive push and pull between two totally different musical impulses. And yeah, it deeply divided their original fan base, but at the same time, it opened the door to millions of brand new listeners.
Section 3. The Power Ballad Juggernaut.
Welcome to the 1980s. This is where Chicago completely reinvents themselves for a brand new generation. When producer David Foster came on board, he effectively changed the band's entire musical DNA. He intentionally stripped back that historically dominant horn section, kind of pushing it more into the background. Then he introduced heavy synthesizers, put a massive spotlight on Peter Cetera's high, clear tenor vocals, and pushed the band to fully embrace the brave new world of MTV music videos. And this modern approach, it sparked a massive platinum-selling comeback with albums like Chicago 16.
But honestly, nothing compares to the explosive success of the follow-up, 6.1 million. That is the jaw-dropping sales figure for their 1984 album Chicago 17, and that's just in the US, UK, and Japan alone. To this day, it remains their absolute biggest selling album ever.
Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer chart dominance of this single record. From just one album, they churned out 4 massive top 20 singles. Hard Habit to Break and You're the Inspiration both skyrocketed to number 3, while Along Comes a Woman and Stay the Night easily cracked the top 20. I mean, they were literally dominating the 1984 airwaves. You couldn't turn on a radio without hearing them.
Now, the really crucial point to remember is that this wasn't just commercial fluff. It was highly awarded and deeply respected within the industry. Chicago 17 snagged 3 Grammy Awards in 1985 and was RIA certified 6 times platinum. In fact, music critics today view this specific album as the absolute pinnacle of the 80s adult contemporary power ballad era. It completely solidified their entirely new identity and guaranteed their survival in a decade that, quite frankly, left a lot of other 60s rock bands completely in the dust.
Section 4, 100 million records.
So let's take a step back and evaluate the total legacy of these two incredibly distinct eras. Their relentless chart dominance across both lifespans is just staggering. 21 top 10 singles, 8 multi-platinum albums, 5 consecutive #1 albums. When you look at American band chart success over the decades, Chicago is literally second only to the Beach Boys. That is the kind of monumental staying power that very, very few acts ever achieve.
And you know, after decades of navigating this incredible dichotomy, the rock fusion pioneers versus the pop ballad kings, their complete multi-genre body of work was finally honored. In 2016, Chicago was officially and rightfully inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a totally well-deserved capstone to an insane career.
So what does this all mean? Well, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Did Chicago lose their rock and roll soul to the sleek pop of the 1980s, or did they simply pull off the greatest genre pivot in music history? I want you to think about which version of the band you prefer, and I highly encourage you to go explore their full, totally fascinating discography for yourself. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I absolutely can't wait to dive into our next topic with you.